There was much talk about Jesus' preaching doctrines which were upsetting for the common people. His enemies maintained that his teachings were impractical, that everything would go to pieces if everybody made an honest effort to live in accordance with his ideas. And the men of many subsequent generations have said the same things. Many intelligent and well-meaning men, even in the more enlightened age of these revelations, maintain that modern civilization could not have been built upon the teachings of Jesus. And they are partially right. But all such doubters forget that a much better civilization could have been built upon his teachings, and sometime will be. This world has never seriously tried to carry out the teachings of Jesus on a large scale, notwithstanding that half-hearted attempts have often been made to follow the doctrines of so-called Christianity. 5. The eventful Sunday morning. May 22 was an eventful day in the life of Jesus. On this Sunday morning, before daybreak, one of David's messengers arrived in great haste from Tiberias, bringing the word that Herod had authorized, or was about to authorize, the arrest of Jesus by the officers of the Sanhedrin. The receipt of the news of this impending danger caused David Zebedee to arouse his messengers and send them out to all the local groups of disciples, summoning them for an emergency council at 7 o'clock that morning. When the sister-in-law of Jude, Jesus' brother, heard this alarming report, she hastened word to all of Jesus' family who dwelt nearby, summoning them forthwith to assemble at Zebedee's house. And in response to this hasty call, presently there were assembled Mary, James, Joseph, Jude, and Ruth. At this early morning meeting, Jesus imparted his farewell instructions to the assembled disciples. That is, he bade them farewell for the time being, knowing well that they would soon be dispersed from Capernaum. He directed them all to seek God for guidance and to carry on the work of the kingdom regardless of consequences. The evangelists were to labor as they saw fit until such time as they might be called. He selected 12 of the evangelists to accompany him. The 12 apostles he directed to remain with him no matter what happened. The 12 women he instructed to remain at the Zebedee house and at Peter's house until he should send for them. Jesus consented to David Zebedee's continuing his countrywide messenger service, and in bidding the master farewell presently, David said, "Go forth to your work, master. Don't let the bigots catch you, and never doubt that the messengers will follow after you. My men will never lose contact with you, and through them you shall know of the kingdom in other parts, and by them we will all know about you. Nothing that might happen to me will interfere with this service, for I have appointed first and second leaders, even a third. I am neither a teacher nor a preacher, but it is in my heart to do this, and none can stop me." About 7:30 this morning, Jesus began his parting address to almost 100 believers who had crowded indoors to hear him. This was a solemn occasion for all present, but Jesus seemed unusually cheerful. He was once more like his normal self. The seriousness of weeks had gone, and he inspired all of them with his words of faith, hope, and courage. 6. Jesus' family arrives. It was about 8 o'clock on this Sunday morning when 5 members of Jesus' earth family arrived on the scene in response to the urgent summons of Jude's sister-in-law. Of all his family in the flesh, only one, Ruth, believed wholeheartedly and continuously in the divinity of his mission on earth. Jude and James, and even Joseph, still retained much of their faith in Jesus, but they had permitted pride to interfere with their better judgment and real spiritual inclinations. Mary was likewise torn between love and fear, between mother love and family pride. Though she was harassed by doubts, she could never quite forget the visit of Gabriel ere Jesus was born. The Pharisees had been laboring to persuade Mary that Jesus was beside himself, demented. They urged her to go with her sons and seek to dissuade him from further efforts at public teaching. They assured Mary that soon Jesus' health would break, and that only dishonor and disgrace could come upon the entire family as a result of allowing him to go on. And so, when the word came from Jude's sister-in-law, all 5 of them started at once for Zebedee's house, having been together at Mary's home, where they had met with the Pharisees the evening before. They had talked with the Jerusalem leaders long into the night, and all were more or less convinced that Jesus was acting strangely, that he had acted strangely for some time. While Ruth could not explain all of his conduct, she insisted that he had always treated his family fairly and refused to agree to the program of trying to dissuade him from further work. On the way to Zebedee's house, they talked these things over and agreed among themselves to try to persuade Jesus to come home with them. For, said Mary, I know I could influence my son if he would only come home and listen to me. James and Jude had heard rumors concerning the plans to arrest Jesus and take him to Jerusalem for trial. They also feared for their own safety. As long as Jesus was a popular figure in the public eye, his family allowed matters to drift along. But now that the people of Capernaum and the leaders at Jerusalem had suddenly turned against him, they began keenly to feel the pressure of the supposed disgrace of their embarrassing position. They had expected to meet Jesus, take him aside, and urge him to go home with them. They had thought to assure him that they would forget his neglect of them. They would forgive and forget, if he would only give up the foolishness of trying to preach a new religion which could bring only trouble to himself and dishonor upon his family. To all of this Ruth would say only, I will tell my brother that I think he is a man of God, and that I hope he would be willing to die before he would allow these wicked Pharisees to stop his preaching. Joseph promised to keep Ruth quiet while the others labored with Jesus. When they reached the Zebedee house, Jesus was in the very midst of delivering his parting address to the disciples. They sought to gain entrance to the house, but it was crowded to overflowing. Finally, they established themselves on the back porch and had word passed in to Jesus, from person to person, so that it finally was whispered to him by Simon Peter, who interrupted his talking for the purpose, and who said, Behold, your mother and your brothers are outside, and they are very anxious to speak with you. Now it did not occur to his mother how important was the giving of this parting message to his followers, neither did she know that his address was likely to be terminated any moment by the arrival of his apprehenders. She really thought, after so long an apparent estrangement, in view of the fact that she and his brothers had shown the grace actually to come to him, that Jesus would cease speaking and come to them the moment he received word they were waiting. It was just another of those instances in which his earth family could not comprehend that he must be about his Father's business. And so Mary and his brothers were deeply hurt when, notwithstanding that he paused in his speaking to receive the message, instead of his rushing out to greet them, they heard his musical voice speak with increased volume, Say to my mother and my brothers that they should have no fear for me. The Father who sent me into the world will not forsake me, neither shall any harm come upon my family. Bid them be of good courage, and put their trust in the Father of the kingdom. But after all, who is my mother, and who are my brothers? And stretching forth his hands toward all of his disciples assembled in the room, he said, I have no mother, I have no brothers. Behold my mother, and behold my brethren. For whosoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, the same is my mother, my brother, and my sister. And when Mary heard these words, she collapsed in Jude's arms. They carried her out in the garden to revive her, while Jesus spoke the concluding words of his parting message. He would then have gone out to confer with his mother and his brothers, but a messenger arrived in haste from Tiberias, bringing word that the officers of the Sanhedrin were on their way with authority to arrest Jesus and carry him to Jerusalem. Andrew received this message and, interrupting Jesus, told it to him. Andrew did not recall that David had posted some 25 sentinels about the Zebedee house, and that no one could take them by surprise. So he asked Jesus what should be done. The master stood there in silence while his mother, having heard the words, I have no mother, was recovering from the shock in the garden. It was at just this time that a woman in the room stood up and exclaimed, Blessed is the womb that bore you, and blessed are the breasts that nursed you. Jesus turned aside a moment from his conversation with Andrew to answer this woman by saying, No, rather is the one blessed who hears the word of God and dares to obey it. Mary and Jesus' brothers thought that Jesus did not understand them, that he had lost interest in them, little realizing that it was they who failed to understand Jesus. Jesus fully understood how difficult it is for men to break with their past. He knew how human beings are swayed by the preacher's eloquence, and how the conscience responds to emotional appeal as the mind does to logic and reason. but he also knew how far more difficult it is to persuade men to disown the past. It is forever true that all who may think they are misunderstood or not appreciated have in Jesus a sympathizing friend and an understanding counselor. He had warned his apostles that a man's